You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinezic.
Been waiting for this episode for a good month. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinezic, and this is going to be a really special episode. Today we're lifting up our heads a little bit, shifting our focus, a little bit different spot than we normally take you, and we're going to look at the grand scheme of things, not so much our local area, but what's going on a global level. So really, that's how we grow.
It is. It's a little bit out of our comfort zone. Every episode, we typically tend to focus on what is native to us, what is native in our little world. Sometimes it's New Jersey, sometimes it's the Northeast, sometimes it's our country, but we're just a small part of that natural network in our world, and all these networks need to work together to keep our planet healthy. The thing connecting us all together are our oceans, and that's one topic we have not really focused on, so today we're going to take things in that direction.
Yeah, and we are really, really fortunate to have a very special guest on today. Not only is he one of National Geographic's explorers in residence, but he's a renowned marine biologist and ecologist. He's an academic turned activist, founding Pristine Seas and winning numerous awards such as the Young Global Leader Award and countless others. But today he's here to talk to us and you about his new book, The Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild. Dr. Sala, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us your bio?
Hello, Fran and Tom. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today.
Oh, thank you.
I am Enrique Sala, a National Geographic explorer in residence. I used to be an academic, and now as you said, I'm a conservationist full-time.
One of the quotes I love is, I guess, in reference to your decision to turn from academic to activist, was you were tired of writing obituaries for the oceans.
Yeah, I used to be a professor at the University of California in San Diego, and I was studying the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impacts of fishing, global warming. And one day I realized that all I was doing was writing the obituary of the ocean, rewriting it with more and more precision. So I felt like the doctor who's going to tell you how you're going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. And of course, as you can imagine, that was not fulfilling. It was on the verge of being depressing. And I decided to quit academia and dedicate my life to try to bring back the health and richness of the ocean.
So I guess part of that step is the new book that you have written that will be coming out very soon, August 25th, I believe. And Tom and I both love this book. I'm a slow reader, and I cannot believe how quickly I consume this book. And I feel that it does a fantastic job outlining what we know about nature, which in the grand scheme of things is a relatively small amount. And it applies it to where we are headed and why we need to fix it. And Tom and I were both saying to do it, if you could give any novice person that wants to make a difference or learn about this any one book, we had this discussion, this would be the book we would want them to start out with, because it looks at it as a global scale and how it affects everything, not just our own little world. So we know that the book was technically completed before the COVID-19 outbreak, prompting you to go back and write one last chapter. But after all your years of study, why do you think now was the right time for this book? Why were you ready for this now?
Well, first of all, Fran, thank you so much for your nice word. You made my day.
No problem.
There is never a bad time, I think, to make the case for why nature is important. But last year, I felt it was the right time for me to write about it, because I wanted to share the main ideas I have learned, I have been thinking about for 30 years that I've been conducting scientific research. Yeah. And also, the timing was good, in my opinion, because next year in China, 196 countries are going to meet and agree on how much more space we are willing to give to nature. This is the conference of the parties of the UN Convention on Biodiversity.
Yeah.
And the science is telling us that we need at least 30% of the planet protected by 2030. And this is the target that we are pushing with our friends of the Campaign for Nature.
And
But,
technically, we need more than that, but that's a compromise.
The science is telling us we need half of the planet in natural state. Half, land and sea. But 30% by 2030, we think is an ambitious enough timeline. But still, even though the science is clear, then people are telling us, well, why do we need to protect more of nature? So I wanted to show by telling stories how nature works. How is it possible that all these millions of species of plants and animals and microbes interact and make our world work? Make the earth a place where we can live and thrive. But then people ask, can we afford it? Right?
Yeah.
So I make the economic case too, and the economic case is very clear. We have a study that we released on on July 8th that shows that for every dollar we invest in protected areas, nature gives us $5 back.
Wow.
And that was one of the things I really loved about the book and was happy to see, was that economic perspective, because so many times when we're talking about, you should probably install a pollinator meadow or you need to use more native plants, people think about it from a business lens. They're saying, but it's so much more expensive, and I'm going to have to do all this maintenance on it. And they don't look at the value over time and how much value they're getting back, and just the value of the ecosystem services, whether it's pollinator benefits or cleaner water or just overall habitat.
Or storm protection.
Yeah.
So many things. And it's, I think it's really telling that you started off by saying you're going to discuss how much we're willing to give back to nature. And I which kind of leads me, I think as humans, we tend to think of ourselves as larger than nature, that it serves us, it revolves around us, instead of us being just a part of the balance of nature. We've kind of evolved to outthink many of our predators, including Mother Nature and disease. And do you think, given today's atmosphere, that the current pandemic is nature's way of rebalancing, as if our ecosystem's self-regulating through feedback loops?
I like the way you think. Well, when the pandemic happened, to me that was the loudest wake-up call.
Okay.
The strongest reminder that we are all together in this, and that if we tamper with nature in one part of the world, now this can affect everybody's lives and the global economy. As we have seen during this pandemic, the health and the well-being of the richest person of the planet, or the head of a state, as we have seen recently, depends on the health of the poorest person in the poorest country. We are all citizens of our biosphere, that living layer of the planet, and I'm very humbled by what just happened.
Yeah.
So instead of going back to the pretense that we are masters of the universe, we need to be really humble, and we can send a rocket to Pluto and take photographs and make scientific measurements. But all our technology, hasn't been able to prevent a tiny virus from jumping from people to people and across borders. So is this a way for Gaia, right, for that global ecosystem to self-regulate? Maybe, and actually I like to think that we conservationists are part of the immune system of Gaia. But whatever it is, the fact is that we are not outside of nature, and that we should do no more harm to it.
And you make a good point. I think it's interesting that we spend billions of dollars at looking at Mars as if we need to flee and start life on another planet, instead of investing in fixing where we're at right now. I think that's pretty telling. So do you think, given that situation, that world leaders are ready to hear that we need to dedicate this land?
I would think so. When you think about this report that we released in July, tells us that if we want to protect 30% of the planet by 2030, the annual cost would be $140 billion. You'd think, wow, that's a lot of money. But wait, this is less than what we spend, what the world spends in video games every year.
Yeah.
Right? It's ridiculous. So the money is there. We're just using it for frivolous things, or The governments of the world subsidize activities that destroy nature with $500 billion every year. So the money is there. We just use it, or the citizens accept for governments to use this money to prop up industries of the past, to prop up industries that destroy our life support system, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, I agree 100%. And, and I think for most people, when they think of nature, they tend to just think of their current surroundings or some place that they visited or that they interact with, but they don't look at it globally. And I think that's very telling as well. That, like, how does each country's view differ? Like, how does the destruction of our natural ecosystem, whether it be agricultural farming or business related, how does that affect other countries and vice versa, just in our biosphere?
Well, again, I think that this pandemic has made it very clear. And before, let's remember, there were other zoonotic diseases like SARS, Ebola, HIV. You tamper with nature in one country, you eat wild animals in one country or encroach upon pristine forest, and the consequences now with our globalized lifestyle can stop the global economy. So this notion of America first or my country first is totally delusional.
Yeah.
There can be no prosperity here if the rest of the world is in flames, and vice versa. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the cost of the pandemic might be up to $9 trillion.
Wow.
And look at what happened in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Not only in terms of loss of human life, but the economic downturn and the consequences that are going to last for years. So, no country today is immune to what happens in the rest of the world.
And I think hopefully a lot of people are seeing that. One of the things that I'm curious, I know when dealing with this, there's a lot of other factors at play, and there's businesses who tend or feel that they're going to lose a stake or lose traction by succeeding giving back nature. And we've definitely seen the size of certain national park land decrease in certain years. But you've done a really good job at showing scientifically how saving the ocean can create more revenue than overfishing it. Is it possible with businesses and crop production and corporations to show the same type of economic growth by saving land? I think of companies that are doing good things like Starbucks with their cafe practices, with really investing in good practices and good farming and paying more for those things. Do you think other companies will follow suit, or do you think they're scared at this prospect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And companies, I've been talking to corporate CEOs, and they say, we will do the right thing, but we don't want to be the first movers, right? We want a level playing field.
Yeah.
So it is the big companies, most of them, except the really evil ones.
Yeah.
They are asking governments to set regulation, so then everybody has the same incentives to act, and they know that if they do better for the environment, actually it's going to be better for their bottom line too. And there is also a myth that you hear some people saying, so many people, that we need to cut more forests and convert more grasslands and fish more in the ocean because we'll need to feed 10 billion people very soon. But the truth is that we already produce food for 10 billion people, only that we waste a third of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we don't need to destroy more of nature to feed ourselves. What we need to do is to prevent this loss of food from the farm and from the ocean to the table.
When we first started this podcast, it really started off. We were trying to connect nonprofit companies that are doing good work with local homeowners or people that just want to get involved to see what is being done that's really good out there and how they can get involved. And it's kind of, the more people we have on, the more we realize how much has been destroyed and how it's affecting everything. And the overall theme has been loss of habitat. It just keeps coming up, and the problems that occurs. We've talked about overpopulation of deer. I think a good example, we were just saying, there's areas of forest in New Jersey where deer were once 10 deer per per square mile that are now over 300 deer per square mile.
Wow.
And that pyramid shift has destroyed the shrub layer of our forest, destroying even more habitat and food sources and other species. And you can't reproduce a new forest overnight. So have we gone too far? Like, can the result of overdeveloping be reversed? I know you discuss in your book how fisheries that institute a no-take rebound pretty quickly. Can we see the same thing on land? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. We could spend the entire hour talking about doom and gloom, right?
Yeah.
And we know that 3/4 of the inhabitable land has been altered by human activities, and that 2/3 of the ocean have been affected by industrial fishing, and so on and so forth. But the good thing is that life and the ecosystems that species form have this extraordinary capacity to regenerate and self-assemble in this complex ecosystem, even in the most unlikely places. And if I may, I'd like to talk about an extreme case and then a better way to do things.
Okay.
So everyone, you will remember, and everyone in our generation will remember the explosion of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor in 1986.
Yes.
This neighboring town of Pripyat, they had to evacuate people from there permanently. Even the pets had to be killed because they were spreading radiation.
Wow.
And then nature took over. Now there are tourists going there. You've probably seen stories in the media. The buildings are crumbling. They are being conquered by shrubs and trees. And the city is now the territory of wolves. Mm-hmm. So apparently, the built habitat, the cities that we build, cannot survive without the builders. Right? They just fall apart. So in a few thousand years, maybe, that town of Pripyat will look like the Mayan cities in the jungle when they were first rediscovered under the thick canopy of green. But of course, this is not the ideal way of restoring nature. But this shows that nature has this amazing ability to bounce back if we give her some space. So if we want to see the return of the forest and the grasslands that you were mentioning, we can start by removing all threats to a place, right? Let's start by doing no harm. Then we can replant the right type of species, the native plants that you talk about.
Yeah.
But also we can help the ecosystem accelerate that process of self-assembly by rewilding, meaning introducing first the native herbivores, animals that eat different types of plants and create the conditions for other species to thrive. And when the ecosystem is ready, then we could reintroduce the predators. And I love the example of Yellowstone, where 31 wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park in 1995, 50 years after the last wolf there was killed. And the wolves started by controlling the numbers and the behavior of the elk, which then spent less time grazing and eating the small tree saplings. So the trees came back, and with the trees, the entire ecosystem came back. So we can do it. Nature has the ability. We just need to give her space.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna probably take it in a different direction than Fran would have, but when you wrote about that in the book, one of the things you mentioned was in the United Kingdom how the last wolf had been killed. I think you wrote it was 1390 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Long time before anyone even probably knows relatives that were even trace their family trees back that far. But you started to talk about regenerative agriculture, where we brought on that herbivore species that were a lot of times cattle or kinds of deer, and then the apex predator then became humans, but using it as a food source and actually targeting those and then selling them either mail order or at restaurants or supermarkets. Is that something that's scalable on a much larger level, or is it something that is kind of like a smaller niche?
Because we've actually talked about this in New Jersey when we talked about that deer problem with 300 deer per square mile, and it's not really feasible to reintroduce wolves in New Jersey. We'd love to see it. Yeah, at least right now we'd love to see it, but we don't think that's feasible. But that doesn't mean we can't fix it. We just, as the apex predator, we have to find better ways to control it. So that's what we were curious what your thoughts on that were.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It would be a little tricky to reintroduce wolves in New Jersey right now.
Yeah.
But 300 deer per square acre or square kilometer, it's crazy. It's too much, right? They will eat everything out. So I think we can scale this. Tom, the example you mentioned is this beautiful story of a farm in England called KNEPP,
Yes.
KNEPP. And if the listeners haven't read it yet, I really recommend this book by Isabella Tree. It's a real name, Isabella Tree, and the book is Wilding. So it's a story of how they rewilded their farm. Used to be a farm like any other farm, bad soil, heavily dependent on pesticides and chemicals, and they couldn't compete with the large farms in better soils. So they decided to abandon agriculture and rewild the place. So they started by removing everything that was agricultural there, and they replanted with wildflowers. And within a year, the insects came back, the birds came back, the predators of the birds came back, and then they reintroduced species of herbivores that were similar or the same as the native ones. So they reintroduced red deer, fallow deer, roe deer. They introduced a species of cattle that is similar to the ancient cattle of Europe, the auroch. And they introduced one species of pig that is very similar to the wild boar. And these species, all eating on different plants and doing different things to the soil and to the vegetation, they accelerated the return of that ecosystem. And now it's like an African savanna in England. And people are going there on photo safaris to see the nature that they have never seen in their lives. And this is an example of what can be done by just two people. Imagine if countries decided to restore grasslands, former grasslands that have been overgrazed by cattle. We could see a miracle here.
Oh, our Midwest alone, when you think of the buffalo herds roaming that were killed off, and that's all agriculture crops now. The amount of, you would have to fix that before you could get the buffalo back. They don't even have the amount of land that they need. But to see that happen would be extraordinary. Like, who wouldn't want to go see that? One of the things that we did to prepare to talk to you, besides reading the book, was we watched your TED Talk from about 10 years ago, and a lot of the things you talk about there are in your book as well. So, one of the things that I loved is you didn't just say these are things we need. You actually give scientific fact and show you've been able to prove through pristine seas, hey, if you protect the oceans, you can be maybe more profitable between tourism and fishing would improve. You could catch more by fishing less. At the time of your TED Talk, you were thinking 20% of the ocean you would like to protect for biodiversity, given that oceans create 50% of the oxygen we breathe. Is that now you're shooting for 30? What would be your goal for both land and ocean? I don't know if you would have a different percent for each. Like if you had your way, if you were supreme leader for the day.
Oh boy, I wish. Yes, it would be. The science is very clear. As we have dozens of studies on land and in the sea that are telling us that we need, if we want to prevent a massive extinction of species and the collapse of our life support system, if we are to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, we need half of the planet in natural state. This is what my friend E.O. Wilson calls Half Earth, which is another fantastic book, by the way.
I'll have to look that one up.
E.O. Wilson,
okay.
Half Earth. So we at National Geographic, with our friends at the WIS Campaign for Nature, and now about 30 countries and growing, are pushing for a target by 2030 under the UN Convention on Biodiversity of 30%. But this 30% is a minimum. It's a milestone to where we need to be.
One of the questions that I had written that you actually was debunked as I finished your book because you covered it. I wrote it early on, because I think of, and I have to admit, I'm a little ignorant of other cultures and other countries because I'm not as worldly traveled, and I tend to think that maybe certain countries, maybe or not even certain countries, certain cultures maybe don't rely as heavily on the scientific fact, and it may be more spiritual. But you actually cover that and talk about how spiritual people are about nature, and cultures are, and what they've done to protect it. I think it was New Zealand you mentioned. with one perfect example there. Are there cases worldwide where the science isn't necessarily met with open ears?
Well, I think the three of us live in the United States.
I was going to say, you can say it's American.
Yeah. That would have been my guess without going elsewhere.
Yeah, again, yes, there are countries where right now the leadership is anti-science and anti-common sense. But one good thing of this pandemic, again, is that all of a sudden people became interested in data, and they wanted to see graphs and trends and science, right? And who's the most popular man in the United States right now? Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
The infectious disease expert. People, the public understand the power of science, and everybody is thinking of the time where we're going to have a vaccine. Well, where is the vaccine made? Not at the convention of a political party. It's made in scientific laboratories. So without science, of course, the world wouldn't run. And I think that most people understand and most leaders understand, but of course there are still a few places where science is not convenient for political purposes.
Yeah. Are there countries that are ahead of the curve, that are really doing an exemplary job of preserving nature or turning things around?
Yes, absolutely. And the United States used to be a leader.
Yeah.
Yellowstone National Park, created in 1872, was the first national park in the world. The system of national parks that was created here was extraordinary, but now there are other countries that have surpassed us. You have a little country in the Himalayas, Bhutan. It is in their constitution that 60% of the country has to be protected.
Wow. That's
the little country of Palau in Micronesia. They are a small island country, but they call themselves a large island nation. They have this year in January, they implemented a marine sanctuary that protects 80% of the waters. Chile, another fishing country, has fully protected from fishing a quarter of its waters. So there are countries, both large and small, that are showing leadership. This is what gives me hope, actually.
And then meanwhile, here in the United States, we're talking about selling off public land for business deals.
Yeah, for business deals.
Those kind of things. So,
which is alarming.
It is alarming.
And you mentioned it in your book too, how much space is needed for certain ecosystems to survive, and it's it keeps getting more and more fragmented and more smaller, and unfortunately, as you make it smaller, it doesn't have the resources. If it's fragmented to support everything that's there, they can't really move or roam, and that's what's alarming to us. It's that it's. In I know in some cases it's getting better, but in a lot of cases we see it declining, and that's tough for us.
As going back to the global scale and looking at which countries are doing well and which countries might be doing poorly, say we at this the meeting you were talking about in China, we come to an agreement, say, hey, this is what we need to do as a world, as a globe. This is what we need to meet. Who's going to be in charge of holding everyone responsible, and how do we prevent a situation where you have the United States saying, oh, well, we're not doing everything we're supposed to, but look at China, they're not doing everything either, and you look at the UK, they're not doing everything, so we're okay not doing everything as well. Who's going to keep that train moving in the right direction?
Yeah, this is exactly one of the problems with many international agreements, that they are not legally binding. They are, in most cases, volunteer commitments. So the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity is the entity that is supposed to set the agreements, set the targets, and monitor. But at the end of the day, it's every country that is responsible for protection within their own territory, within their own borders. So we have seen it in the United States, where President Trump decided that he didn't want the United States to be in the Paris Climate Agreement anymore. So he started the process to withdraw, right?
Yeah.
So I hope that at the country level, the citizens are going to be the ones making sure that the governments deliver on their promises by, in some cases, voting for the politicians that fulfill their values.
Yeah.
And also by making sure that if there is blatant violation of these commitments, that people will make their voice made clear. And this is something that I think has been very positive this year in the United States and around the world, of people demonstrating massively for the things that they thought were right.
Mm-hmm. We have a voice in numbers, and everyone will have the opportunity in the coming year to make that vote if that's what's passionate to them. So
the first law of politics is re-election.
Yeah.
Right? And there is nothing that scares the politicians the most than losing voters.
Yeah. So I would imagine at any time, it's especially close to a re-election year, it's got to be difficult to make drastic change or push drastic change through that way. I would imagine that's difficult unless it's something that everyone's behind and it's a crowd pleaser. I think protecting nature isn't necessarily always the biggest crowd pleaser. I think sometimes, unfortunately, but one thing that I realized in reading your book, and we deal with native plants and we deal with the land, is the education for me with how little I personally know about our waters, and that's one of the things I really appreciate. So, and I think, going back to the land, bees are a great example of how little we know about nature, much like the algae of the oceans. And the work that Sam Droege does at the National Bee Inventory really is cutting edge, and he's just starting to scratch the surface about what we know about native bees and their importance. And he had stressed to us that it made them realize how much they didn't know and how little data there was. What organisms of the ocean need that same type of study right now to understand the health of our waters?
Well, the thing is that typically we don't know what's the importance of a species until we get rid of them, and then we see things happen, right?
Yeah.
In the Pacific Northwest, fur hunters got rid of the sea otters, and then their favorite prey, the sea urchins, exploded, and they ate all the kelp forest, and all the species that lived within the kelp forest went away. So you cannot know what the role of the sea otter in the ecosystem is until they are gone. And with millions of species of plants and animals and 1 trillion different types of microbes in the world, it's really impossible to know what the role of most of them is. And I like to use this example that is in the book, is something called Prochlorocopus. That's the scientific name of a bacteria.
Okay.
That is one of the smallest bacteria. It's only 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter in size.
Okay.
It is so small that scientists didn't discover it until 1988. Yet, this little bacteria is one of the most abundant creatures on the planet. You're talking about 300 deer per hectare or per square kilometer. We have 20,000 of these bacteria in a single drop of seawater. And what do? They do photosynthesis like the plants on the land, and they produce oxygen in the process. They actually produce the oxygen in every other breath we take.
Wow.
And we didn't know about the existence of this bacteria until 1988. It's crazy.
It's amazing. I mean, that's such a short period ago to learn something like that, and it makes you wonder what we don't know. What are we still going to discover and say? How did we not know that?
Exactly. But what we know is that the more abundant, when it comes to assessing the health of an ecosystem, what we have learned, and I think we can extrapolate to most ecosystems, is that the more abundant the predators, the healthier the ecosystem is. Yeah. So if you can immediately know, at least we have been diving in places that range from pristine to totally degraded, and if you jump in the water and you see lots of sharks, that's a healthy place. Right. That's what you want to see.
And that's similar to some of the entomologists we've talked to in the past, where they said that, the sign of a healthy pollinator habitat is when you have a lot of dragonflies and ladybugs and things that are going to eat the pollinators and their larvae. Yeah. It's having those predators. That's a really good sign that it's a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it's, there's so many great examples in your book, just even of ecosystems. Tom and I both loved your analogy of New York City as a man-made ecosystem and how closely it relates to a natural ecosystem and showing a form of human succession. And it made me think of so many sociology studies that I've seen that really kind of mimic natural ecosystems, but they don't quite get it right. I grew up in Levittown, Pennsylvania, which was at the time the largest plant community of its day. And William Levitt, when he built it, there's 5 types of houses, and each development had only just one type of house. And as he walked away from it, he's like, wow, this is my biggest failure. I've segregated classes. And that's not what I want to do. So when he built his next Levittown, which is now Willingboro, New Jersey, he put all 5 homes in each development, and it ended up turning out to be his biggest failure because it ended up just dropping the property value of all the houses to the smaller of the houses. And the city kind of declined. And even though they're just across the river from each other, they're really economically in much different places. So it's kind of like without studying it, he just tried to cheat succession by having all the grasses, shrubs, large canopy trees all at once. And he kind of blurred the lines between symmetrical and asymmetrical boundaries. And I still think that these are things that we're still trying to learn, but nature just seems to already know them. So do you think that nature knows them? Do you think they inherently know them, or it was just a matter of evolution that's happened way before we even got here?
I think they evolved this way over time. Remember that when life started to appear on Earth, the environment was so poisonous that we and most creatures that live today couldn't live. It was cyanobacteria, like this Prochlorocopus, very small bacteria that started to produce oxygen through photosynthesis. Okay. They were the first plant-like microbes that started to produce oxygen. They started to fill the atmosphere with oxygen. Well, that didn't go well for all these creatures for which oxygen was poisonous, but thanks to that, we're here now. So, but what seems to be the rule over the history of life on our planet is the growth of diversity and complexity. It just gets more diverse and more complex, except, of course, during the 5 mass extinction. But it seems that now we are also bent to destroy that richness and that diversity.
Even just recently, I think as a nation, we're just starting to learn the role of invasives and how much damage they're causing for our forests and our land. And that's just something that really has hit home in the last probably 10 years, I'd say, where they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be growing burning bush. Maybe we shouldn't be growing barberry. They're just starting to realize some of these issues. Is our exotic invasives an issue in our oceans as well?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in the Mediterranean Sea. When I was a kid, I did not see a single invasive species.
Okay.
Now, the Mediterranean has 800 introduced species. Wow. Most of them coming from the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. Wow. And I like to use this example. In 2008, some colleagues and I were doing surveys of the coast of Turkey. And we had expected to see these seaweed forests. The bottom would be covered by seaweed. And there was nothing there. It was a barren. And we saw lots and lots of rabbitfish, introduced species from the Red Sea. And these rabbitfish, they eat algae. We thought, wow, is this the cause? Are these invasive fish able to turn an underwater forest into a desert? Wow. And to prove that, we did an experiment. We placed cages, plastic cages, like this plastic fencing for gardens. Okay. So we put plastic cages in some areas where the rabbitfish could not access the seafloor, right, where they could not graze.
Okay.
And it took only 1 month for the native algae to come back.
Wow.
So that shows 2 species of rabbitfish, 2 species of fish from the Red Sea, and these guys are not very big. The biggest one is maybe a foot long. Were able to turn the Eastern Mediterranean into an underwater desert.
Wow. Just going off topic for a second, I'm sorry, I'm going to derail this for a second, because you brought up where you grew up. So one of the things that my fiance related to in your book, my fiance was born in Poland, and one of the things on our first date, one of the things she talked about was reminiscing about foraging for mushrooms in the forest and having them cooked as soon as she got back. That it was something that her mom still does, that her dad and grandfather taught her to do, and that was a large portion of her day. Every day, her job was to go out and forage for mushrooms. So she was curious. She was saying she was taught, besides obviously visually being able to tell this one's poisonous and this isn't poisonous, she was told if she didn't know to put the tip of her tongue on the gills, and if it tingled, it was poisonous, and if it didn't, it was okay. And she was curious if if you had a similar story.
Wow, no, I don't remember my father teaching me that way. No. I guess we were a little less adventurous.
Okay.
And we stuck to the species of mushroom that were known not to be poisonous.
Okay. It might have been a little different time for her. It was.
Yeah, no, I would not try. I would not try that myself.
It doesn't sound like food was as abundant during those years, so I could see why they were a little more adventurous.
So one of the things I'll actually bring up is another. I think the people that you brought into nature are probably a little bit more important than the ones I've brought into nature, but you really did a good job of putting that picture of when you've brought some of these people in positions of power and you gave them presentation, and maybe it didn't have quite the effect you wanted, but when you showed them, either you took them snorkeling, or in the one case you let them drive the little robotic submarine, that's what really gave them the spark and said, oh, this is something that's really important and we need to save. And I've had those same instances, even just with my now wife, where when we were dating and we'd go and I'd just taken a hike and just say, oh, that's this, and this is this plant, and this is this way because the deer did this, and that's why this invasive plant's here. And then she started to get it, and things that she'd never seen before, it kind of opened her eyes, and she realized how important it was to preserve them or change them or take the necessary action. I guess where I'm getting with that is that's not available to everybody. You have, especially in the United States, where I just found out last week where I think it's like 70% of the country, or 70% of U.S. citizens have never left the country, not even gone to Canada or Mexico. A lot of them don't have access to nature, especially if they're living in urban environments. How do you convince them that preserving 30% of the planet is important?
Yeah, it's not easy. and yeah, you take somebody to a beautiful natural place, and they have to be soulless, heartless if they don't fall in love with the place, right? You take anybody to a redwood forest or diving on a pristine coral reef, and what we have seen is that you take a leader to one of these places, and the little kid in them just comes back, and you can see the eyes, open, bright eyes and a smile. And unfortunately, they are busy people. We cannot always bring them to the field with us, and then we have to bring the field to them. So that's why we produce these videos and films at National Geographic to inspire them. But when we're talking about something that is more abstract, like 30%, then for leaders, what we are doing is using the economic argument, because the Minister of the Environment, she will get it. She'll say, okay, no, I understand this place is incredible, very important, we need to protect it. But then when they have a cabinet meeting, the finance minister is going to ask, but how much is going to cost, right?
Yeah.
And we have studies showing that the benefits outweigh the cost, and that the initial investment is less than what we spend in activities that destroy nature. So, like it or not, we have to use the economic argument as one of the main arguments with political leaders.
Yeah, I just think how much more appreciative Tom and I would be if he took us diving with you.
Yeah,
that would be a real eye opener for us.
You only needed to ask.
Is there cutting edge research that you're aware of that you're excited that's going to be coming out soon, or someone in the field that's working on something that you're really excited about?
Well, the things that I don't know. But I don't know. what I love is to be surprised.
Okay.
Looking at a new story or opening up a scientific journal and seeing a study that is like, wow, this is so cool, or we really need that.
Yeah.
But we have been working. Well, I know about the study that we are doing. We have a study in review in a scientific journal that shows that if we protected more than 30% of the ocean, actually this would have triple benefits. It would help, one, to preserve marine life, biodiversity that is unique and irreplaceable. Two, it would boost fisheries catch globally. And three, it would help the ocean continue to store more carbon and help us to mitigate climate change. So more protection can help us with food security and with climate change mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
If you were sitting here and you had a skeptical business person and you had their ear, what's the greatest example that you could give them of how it actually paid to have nature over business? If you had to convert a businessman right now, is there one example that would knock their socks off?
I think it's much easier to convince a country leader than a corporate CEO. But no, there are great examples. For example, I read a story in the New York Times this year. The Empire State Building, the management of the Empire State Building, the owner, they decided to change all of the insulation of the building, including the windows.
Okay.
It cost them I don't remember how many millions of dollars, but they have been able to cut the energy consumption by 40%.
Wow.
Which means that every year they are saving $4 million in energy bills alone.
Which pretty much pays for what was just done.
After a few years, it pays off. It offset the cost. So that's an example. Talking about a real estate business.
Speaking of surprises, the foreword of your book is written by the Prince of Wales. How did that happen?
Well, His Royal Highness is a committed conservationist.
Okay.
He has warned about the destruction of the natural world for decades, and he's written eloquently about it. He's publishes really beautiful books. One of my favorites is one called Harmony.
Okay.
Very eloquent, very poetic, but also based on science and economic numbers. So I asked him if he would write a foreword for a book on an issue that he cares passionately about, and I'm honored that he agreed to do so.
That is wonderful. We were excited to see that.
Yeah.
That was that was very cool.
When Fran first told me that we were going to have you on, he's like, yeah, and the Prince of Wales wrote the foreword. That doesn't make any sense. But then as I started to look into it, it did make a lot of sense. And I think it gives you a little bit more clout when you're bringing this book to the table, too.
Yes, I agree. And like we said, this is the one book that, that we already hold in such high regards. Like if we were to give, we were saying, all right, if you were to give 3 books to someone and tell them to read, we would want them to read yours first. And then, we threw in the same company of Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Doug
you are
Tallamy.
so sweet. That's so kind of you. Thank you so much.
And Benjamin Vogt with his, was it New Garden Ethic? I think these are all books that people need to read if they're concerned, even if they're not concerned, they're eye openers of what we need to know. So, Tom, did you have something?
Thank you. I feel flattered.
Oh no, thank you.
So this is actually a question from my brother, who
he's really disappointed he's not in on this.
When we told
podcast.
him we were doing this, he really wanted to be a part of it.
Steve travel. Steve is worldly traveled. He goes all over for diving.
He's a avid spear fisherman and diver, and actually our whole family does some scuba diving. My uncle's actually a scuba diving travel agent, and he's going to the Philippines and all over the world. I'd be surprised if he doesn't know who you are. But my brother's question was, if he wanted to get involved with what you're doing and be your right-hand man, what would he have to do to take those steps? And I guess I'm even going to broaden that out and say, if people wanted to get involved, not just helping hands-on, but monetarily, how can they get involved with the things you do?
Well, I'm liking this discussion.
Okay.
No, okay. So there are many ways people can help, and when I was a little kid growing up on the Mediterranean coast, I was fascinated by the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, by the French explorer. I wanted to be a diver on his boat and go around the world, but I wrote him a letter, and an assistant wrote back this very nice, sorry, but we have more demand than supply, and but we appreciate your efforts. Good luck. In the same way, it's when we do our work on expeditions, we go on ships, and of course the space is limited. But there are things that people can do to help, and if it's not through our Pristine Seas project, and if you want to know more about our ocean conservation project, you can go to our website, pristineseas.org, pristineseas.org, and learn more about what we do.
We're gonna put that link when we publish this. We're gonna put that link and other links on our website so people can find all these really
wonderful.
quickly.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.
But there are other things that people can do in terms of monetary contributions. I think that in 2020, one of the best ways to use our money is to contribute to the campaign of the presidential candidate that you think is closer to your values when it comes to the environment. And I am doing that myself, and I'm telling all my friends that this is the year. This is a key year, so that's a good way to put your voice and your money to work. But also, there is something that everybody can do every day that would help. And you guys this is like preaching to the choir. I don't know why I dare to say that in the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, but it's having a plant-based diet, right?
Yeah.
Plant-based diet is good for you. It's good for the planet. It would reduce CO2 emissions enormously, and it would reduce the footprint on our lands. It would allow us to restore many more of the forests and the grasslands and the wetlands that we need for a healthy planet.
When I think of our footprint too, just based on our diets, I think of things like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and all the disposable waste from food that doesn't need to be there, and that's and it's those things were created inadvertently, not purposefully. I don't even know if I guess it's fixable, but like who owns up to something like that and says we'll take care of that patch, that garbage patch? Does anyone claim I shouldn't say responsibility. I'm sure no one's going to claim responsibility for that, but just that to vow to fix that.
Is everyone going to take initiative in going to clean it up?
Yeah, there is one private effort trying to do that, but the problem is that the garbage patch is in international waters.
Okay.
It's beyond any country's jurisdictions. Of course, it's you can wash your hands. It's not my problem, right?
Yeah.
Even though we all contribute to it, but we cannot remove that patch or any other 5 big ocean patches, but we can make them smaller. We can clean part of the trash at the surface, and that would reduce the risk of death for seabirds, sea turtles, marine mammals, which would be great. But this is just a small part of all the plastic trash that is in the ocean. Most of the trash is underwater and very small, what we call microplastics, and that's impossible to clean.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but we can do the right things to reduce and hopefully stop the amount of plastic going into the environment.
One of the things I appreciate, at least, that some of the companies, they may not be able to control where that waste goes, but like someone like Corona, I think they developed a can ring, the 6-pack holder that's biodegradable and made of fish food. So if it does end up in the ocean, so it will biodegrade and hopefully feed fish. At least people are thinking about how they can make a change instead of just saying it's out of their hands.
Yeah, no, that's very creative. I didn't know about that example. Yeah,
they're actually, I believe it was Corona, but they're pushing other companies to take part in it. They don't want it to just be them. They developed it in hopes that everyone would use it to kind of reduce that, which I thought was a great challenge, and it was nice to see. But I know we're getting close to
The end of our time.
The end of our time. So we always end our show with one final question, but we're going to change
And then
it
a
up.
final thought.
And then a final thought, yeah. But we're going to change it up just a little bit for you. We typically our final question is always, what is your favorite native plant? But we're going to change it up, and we want to ask you what your favorite algae is and why.
I love this question. I love it. Usually people ask, especially kids, what's your favorite marine animal? But poor plants, you are absolutely right. I love it. That's the first time anybody has asked that.
Oh, awesome.
Okay. Well, I was talking about that earlier today. So probably my favorite algae is the giant kelp.
Okay.
Now, the giant kelp, why? Because the giant kelp is the redwood of the sea. It's the largest big algae in the ocean. So you can be diving, you can be at 120 feet, and there you have the base of the plant that reaches all the way up to the surface. And these are the fastest growing plants, one of the fastest growing plants on the planet, almost 1.5 feet a day.
Wow.
So if you are very patient and have good lungs, you probably can see them grow. and the beauty is that when the giant kelps reach the surface, they continue to grow, and they create a canopy atop the water surface. So you are down there diving, you look up, and you see these plants growing to the surface like trees, and you can see the sunlight filter through the canopy as if through the stained glass of a cathedral. That's why I like the giant kelp.
And if I remember correctly, you list that in your book as a foundation species. Am I correct? Correct. So
yes,
with the loss of that ecosystem declines.
All the species that depend on the plant for food and that live on the plant and the habitat it creates is like, you remove all the trees in the forest and there is no habitat for the birds.
Yeah. That is a great pick. I love that pick. So that's going to spark me to go do a little more research on it and know more about that. Yeah. That's what I'm taking away from this. So after the last question, we always leave it open for a final thought. If there's anything you could say, if there's anything you want to promote, as well as your book, if there's things that you just want to summarize or mention, you have the floor. It's all yours.
Thank you. So I would just say that everything we need to survive depends on the work of other species, right? Every morsel of food we put in our mouths, the clean water we drink, the oxygen we breathe, depends on all these 9 million species of plants and animals. And since I'm in your podcast, especially the plants, which are at the base of all life on Earth.
Yeah.
I think this is the time. This pandemic is the loudest wake-up call. If we don't change our ways now, when will we? Because I think that now everybody understands that if we don't change our broken relationship with nature, we are going to have another pandemic and then another. And the next might be worse than this one. So we do need to convince our leaders next year in China in 2021 to agree to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030 as one of the main things we have to do. We need to phase off fossil fuels also. We need to change the way we produce food. But protecting more of nature, giving nature more space is absolutely key. It's the best and cheapest insurance policy for humanity.
And you phrase it a great way in your book also when you talk about we're the only species that kind of cheats this by accessing the necrosphere, and how we're kind of like stealing from one account to pay the other account, which I think is a great way to put it. I don't think a lot of people think of it in that way. It's just like, oh, we'll create more. It's an abundant resource. We'll be okay. And it's not. It's not. Tom, you want to go next, or you want me to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
I think
I'm going to go last. Oh, okay.
So, with my brother's question, I started thinking about your answer and saying, Well, you were saying when you were a little kid, you wrote a letter to Jacques Cousteau and said, "How can you be a part of that team?" Well, I started thinking, well, what if there's a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old out there who's listening to this or read your book, and they want to become what you've become? Because obviously you, even though Jacques Cousteau said, "Oh, there's more supply than demand, you can't come work with us," you started doing.
You forged your own way.
You forged your own path and got there as well. What advice would you give to that young teenager or kid to get and achieve what you've achieved?
Yeah, we tell them, make sure that you know what your passion is, what you're really passionate about. Elizabeth Gilbert says that what is the thing that when you're doing it, you don't care about eating, sleeping, peeing. It's just that thing that you're the most passionate about. And then what you are good at. Mm-hmm. If you can combine both into your job, you are going to be a very, very happy and fulfilled person.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I think it's good
advice.
Awesome.
Thank you. Is that your final?
That was it. Yeah.
Do I get to get deep for a second? I've been getting deep a lot.
You've been getting very deep.
Wow. But I've been taking a lot of this really at heart, and I think, even noticeably for me, once the pandemic hit and everything closes down, my fiance and I pretty much every weekend have been hiking every weekend, going to different destinations and being at one with nature. And, and I deal with nature for a living. And sometimes you kind of get disconnected from that. And I kind of really feel this podcast it's awakened me. And this is the best education I feel like I get. Every week we learn something else that you think but you don't really know. And it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. And man, it's like perfect timing for me, and I love where this is going, and I love the guests we have, and I love that you came on today with us, Dr. Sala, and this has been a wonderful experience for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, Fran and Tom, thank you so much. It's been I love your podcast, and I am really honored to be here with you today.
Well, thank you too, and thank you for everyone for listening today. We really hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Sala. Please pick up a copy of his new book, The Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild. It's coming out on August 25th, just a couple days. So make sure you pick up a copy. In fact, just before the show, Fran and I decided we're going to give away 2 copies.
Yeah.
So first, you can enter by joining our Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast Facebook group, and then on the
post for this.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. On the post for this episode, leave a comment about what you thought about the episode, things that you think you could do to help save the planet, and make sure you share that post as well. The other way you can enter is by leaving a 5-star review, and also just letting us know what you thought about the episode, either on Apple Podcast or Podbean or wherever you can review the podcast, because that goes a long way for us.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And make sure you not only buy a copy for yourself, buy a copy for a friend, buy a copy for your local library. Yeah. Make sure it's accessible to anyone that needs to read this.
So yeah, and I guess like we were saying, you can follow Dr. Sala on Twitter at @Enrique_Sala, and make sure to also follow National Geographic's Pristine Seas, which is at NG_Pristine Seas. Thank you everyone for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery.
We will make sure we have all those links on the website too. So you can go there if you're looking for any of the links we talked about. You'll be able to find them all there. You can listen to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast directly at www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. You can also check us out on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or you can just ask Alexa to play the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast.
I'd like to give I'm always screwing up the ending. I was doing so well too.
You were doing good. I was rooting for you.
So I'd like to give a big thank you to Stephen Marr for contributing our theme music. You can also follow us on Twitter, which is at Pineland Nursery. Facebook is Pinelands Nursery NJ. Instagram is at Pinelands Nursery. And don't forget, I've actually been really enjoying your Instagram, Dr. Sal, as well. A lot of good ocean pictures if you're into that. So give that a follow as well. Or you can follow our YouTube account, which is Pinelands Nursery. And like I mentioned before, don't forget about our Facebook group. We've had a lot of great conversations there, and they keep coming.
The conversations have been great. I'm really loving how active everyone's been recently, so keep it going.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Dr. Sala, thank you again so much for being with us. Thanks again, everyone. We will see everyone on the next episode. Until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.